Picture this, you're standing in the crowded marketplace of Rouen on May 30th, 1431. The morning air is thick with smoke and the smell of burning wood. Around you, hundreds of English soldiers and French collaborators are cheering, their faces twisted with bloodlust. In the center of the square stands a wooden platform, and chained to a tall stake is a 19-year-old girl in a coarse grey dress. Her head has been shaved, her eyes are wide with terror, but her lips move in silent prayer. This is Joan of Arc, the peasant girl who claimed God spoke to her, who crowned a king, who drove the English from Orleans. But what you're about to witness isn't just an execution. What's about to unfold before your eyes is one of history's most calculated acts of psychological torture, designed not just to kill, but to break the human spirit in the most horrifying way possible. The flames haven't even been lit yet, and already your blood runs cold. Before diving into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. Joan of Arc wasn't born to die in flames. She wasn't born evil, twisted, or even particularly remarkable. In the village of Domremy, she was simply Jeanne, a farmer's daughter who helped with the livestock and spun wool by candlelight. She showed remarkable promise in her devotion to God, often found praying in the local chapel when other children played in the fields, but fate had other plans. At 13, Joan began hearing voices, not whispers of madness, but clear, commanding voices she identified as Saint Michael, Saint Margaret, and Saint Catherine. According to her own testimony during her trial, these voices told her something that would seal her doom. She was chosen by God to drive the English from French soil and crown the Dauphin as the rightful king. Can you imagine being a teenage girl in 1428, convinced that the Archangel Michael himself was speaking directly to you? The psychological weight of believing yourself chosen by God would be crushing enough, but Joan embraced it with a fervor that terrified those around her. Contemporary accounts describe her as having an almost supernatural confidence, speaking of military strategy and court politics with knowledge no peasant girl should possess. But here's what most people don't understand about Joan's rise to power. It was built on a foundation that would later be used to destroy her. Every miracle attributed to her, every military victory, every moment of divine inspiration would be twisted by her enemies into evidence of heresy and witchcraft. The very qualities that made her a saint to the French would make her a witch to the English. The truth was far darker than the legend suggests. Joan's voices didn't just tell her to fight, they told her she would be captured before midsummer, that she would not live to see another year. She knew her fate from the beginning, yet she marched toward it with terrifying determination. Palace records reveal that even King Charles II, the man she crowned, began distancing himself from Joan as her prophecies grew darker. Multiple sources confirm that by 1430 Joan had become a political liability. The king who owed his crown to her was already planning to abandon her to her fate. Little did Joan know that her capture at Compiègne on May 23, 1430 wasn't just bad luck. Hidden documents discovered centuries later suggest that her own allies may have orchestrated her betrayal, selling her to the Burgundians who would hand her over to the English. The girl who trusted in divine protection was about to learn that human cruelty knows no bounds. What happened next represents one of the most sophisticated psychological torture campaigns in medieval history. Joan's captors didn't just want her dead, they wanted her broken, her legacy destroyed, her divine mission exposed as fraud. The English paid an astronomical sum, 10,000 livres tournois, not for a quick execution, but for a slow, methodical destruction of everything Joan represented. They handed her over to Pierre Cochon, the Bishop of Beauvais, a man whose cruelty was matched only by his intelligence. Cochon understood that simply killing Joan would make her a martyr, but if he could make her recant, make her admit her voices were demons, he could destroy the French cause itself. According to contemporary accounts, Joan's imprisonment in Rouen castle was designed to break her spirit before breaking her body. She was kept in a damp, windowless cell, chained at the ankles, wrists, and waist. But the physical torture was nothing compared to the psychological warfare that began immediately. The court that tried Joan was a masterpiece of legal manipulation. Cochon assembled 31 judges, doctors of theology, and legal experts, not to ensure a fair trial, but to create an overwhelming psychological pressure. Can you imagine facing 31 learned men all convinced of your guilt, all watching your every word for signs of heresy? But this was only the beginning. The interrogations began on February 21, 1431, and continued for months. 6 days a week, Joan was dragged before this assembly of hostile faces and questioned for hours. The The transcripts, which survive to this day, reveal a systematic attempt to trap her in contradictions, to force her to deny her voices or admit they came from Satan. The psychological torture of these sessions is almost impossible to comprehend. Joan, illiterate and only 19, faced questions designed by the finest legal minds of the age. They asked her if she was in God's grace, a question designed to trap her no matter how she answered. If she said yes, she was guilty of pride. If she said no, she condemned herself. Archaeological evidence suggests that Joan's cell was deliberately kept cold and damp to weaken her physically and mentally. She was denied a woman's dress and forced to wear men's clothing, itself considered a sign of heresy, because her male guards would steal any female garments, leaving her naked and vulnerable. Multiple sources confirm that Joan was subjected to what we would now recognize as sexual psychological torture. English soldiers would visit her cell at night, not to rape her, though the threat was constant, but to deprive her of sleep, to keep her in a state of terror and exhaustion that would make her more susceptible to breaking. What happened next was even more disturbing. When traditional interrogation failed to break Joan, Rouen introduced what the court records euphemistically call charitable warnings. In reality, these were detailed descriptions of the torture that awaited her if she didn't confess. They described the rack, the wheel, the red-hot irons that would be applied to her flesh. On May 9, 1431, Joan was taken to the torture chamber. Contemporary accounts describe a room filled with instruments of agony, iron maidens, thumbscrews, devices designed to pull joints apart slowly. But the real torture was psychological. They didn't touch her that day. Instead, they made her stand among these instruments, while they described exactly how each would be used on her body. The court records show that Joan, despite months of imprisonment and psychological torture, refused to break. "If you tear me limb from limb and drive my soul from my body, I will not say anything other than what I have already said," she declared. Her defiance in the face of such calculated cruelty reveals a strength of character that makes what happened next even more horrifying. But Rouen had one final card to play. On May 24th, Joan was taken to the cemetery of Saint-Ouen, where a massive pyre had been built. This wasn't her execution. This was the ultimate psychological manipulation. Surrounded by hundreds of hostile faces, with the smell of burning wood filling her nostrils, Joan was told this was her last chance to recant. And in that moment, facing the flames, the 19-year-old girl who had crowned a king finally broke. She signed a document, though being illiterate, she had no idea what it said, renouncing her voices and her mission. The crowd that had come to see her burn was denied their spectacle. Joan had been broken without being killed, but the relief was temporary. Within days, Joan realized she had been tricked. The document she signed wasn't just a recantation, it was a confession to crimes she had never committed. Her voices, she claimed, returned to reproach her for her weakness. On May 28th, she put on men's clothing again, and declared that her voices were from God, not the devil. What you're about to hear isn't just about Joan's death. It's about how human beings can transform the act of killing into an art form of cruelty. Roun's rage at Joan's relapse was calculated and cold. She had denied him his perfect victory, his complete psychological triumph. If he couldn't have her soul, he would settle for making her death a spectacle of suffering that would terrify anyone who might follow in her footsteps. The execution was scheduled for May 30th, but the preparations began days earlier. The pyre wasn't built for efficiency. It was engineered for maximum suffering. Contemporary witness accounts, including testimony from the executioner himself, reveal the horrifying truth. The platform was built deliberately high, so high that the flames couldn't reach Joan's upper body quickly. Picture the moment when Joan was dragged from her cell that final morning. She had spent the night in prayer, knowing exactly what awaited her. Multiple sources confirm that she asked for a cross to hold, but was denied even this comfort. Instead, an English soldier mocked her by fashioning a crude cross from 2 sticks, which Joan pressed to her chest as she was led to her death. The crowd that gathered in Rouen's marketplace that morning was estimated at over 800 people. English soldiers, French collaborators, church officials, all come to witness the destruction of the girl who had humiliated the English war machine. But according to contemporary accounts, something unexpected happened as Joan was chained to the stake. The executioner, a man named Geoffroy Therage, later testified that he had never seen such composure in someone about to die. Joan didn't scream, didn't beg, didn't curse her captors. Instead, she began to pray aloud, her voice carrying across the silent marketplace. Even her enemies were struck by her dignity in those final moments. But what happened next reveals the true horror of medieval execution methods. The fire was lit not at Joan's feet, but at the base of the pyre, far below the platform where she stood. This wasn't incompetence, This was deliberate. The flames would take time to reach her, time during which she would watch her death approaching with agonizing slowness. Contemporary witness accounts describe how Joan's voice continued to ring out across the marketplace as the smoke began to rise. She called on Jesus, on her saints, on God himself. But as the flames grew higher, her voice began to change. The prayers became gasps, the gasps became screams. Archaeological evidence suggests that the pyre burned for over 3 hours. 3 hours during which Joan of Arc, the girl who had crowned a king, died inch by agonizing inch. The executioner later testified that he had to add more wood twice to keep the flames burning, as if even the fire itself was reluctant to consume such innocence. The psychological torture didn't end with Joan's death. Cauchon ordered that her ashes be scattered in the Seine River, denying her followers any relics, any physical connection to their martyred saint. But even this wasn't enough. The English spread rumors that Joan had recanted again at the moment of death, that her final words were confessions of fraud and witchcraft. Multiple sources confirm that several witnesses to the execution later recanted their testimony, claiming they had been coerced into lying about what they had seen. Some reported that Joan had maintained her faith until her final breath. Others spoke of signs and portents, doves seen flying from the flames, her heart found intact among the ashes. The final consequences of Joan's execution rippled far beyond that smoke-filled marketplace in Rouen. Within weeks, reports of her composure and dignity in death began to spread throughout France. The English had succeeded in killing Joan, but they had failed utterly in destroying what she represented. Cauchon's careful legal proceedings, designed to legitimize Joan's execution, began to unravel almost immediately. Too many witnesses had seen too much. The girl who was supposed to die as a witch was already being whispered about as a saint. Within 2 years, the French had driven the English from most of their territories. Joan's death had accomplished what her life had begun. Hidden documents discovered centuries later reveal that several of Joan's judges expressed private doubts about the trial, even before her execution. Jean Lemaitre, the inquisitor who had reluctantly participated in her condemnation, later wrote that he had been greatly troubled by the proceedings. But the real horror was yet to come. In 1456, 25 years after Joan's death, Pope Calixtus III authorized a retrial. The proceedings, which lasted 2 years, heard testimony from over 100 witnesses. The portrait that emerged was devastating to Joan's accusers. Witness after witness testified to irregularities in the original trial, to coercion, to outright fabrication of evidence. The retrial revealed that Joan's execution had been nothing more than a political assassination dressed up in legal robes. Every charge against her was overturned. She was declared innocent of all heresy, her memory rehabilitated, her family name restored. But this vindication came too late for the 19-year-old girl who had died in agony, calling on God to the very end. Can you imagine the crushing irony? The same church that had burned Joan as a heretic now declared her a martyr. The same legal system that had condemned her now proclaimed her innocence. The same God she had died calling upon was now said to have been with her all along. The broader impact on society was profound. Joan's execution marked a turning point in the 100 Years' War, but more than that, it demonstrated the lengths to which those in power would go to maintain their control. Her death became a symbol of the innocent destroyed by corrupted tyrants, a theme that resonates through history to our present day. What we learn from Joan's story isn't just about medieval cruelty or political manipulation. It's about the human capacity for both transcendent courage and calculated evil. Here was a teenage girl who faced 131 hostile judges, months of psychological torture, and finally death by fire, yet never lost her conviction that she was serving something greater than herself. The lasting impact of Joan's death extends far beyond the medieval period. Her story has inspired countless others facing impossible odds, reminding us that sometimes the greatest victory comes not in avoiding death, but in how we choose to face it. Joan of Arc died as she had lived, defiant, faithful, and utterly convinced that truth would ultimately triumph over power. In the end, perhaps that's the most horrifying aspect of her story. Not the flames, not the psychological torture, not even the calculated cruelty of her captors. The most horrifying truth is how little has changed. Power still fears truth, institutions still destroy those who threaten them, and innocence still suffers at the hands of those who claim to serve justice. Joan of Arc's tortured death wasn't just the execution of a 19-year-old girl, it was the murder of hope itself, carried out by those who feared what hope might accomplish.